Compare a human to our closest animal relatives, and one strange number gives away a secret. Your body has been keeping your whole life. It's about testicles. Stay with me, because this matters. Among the great apes, there's a clear and well-studied pattern. Chimpanzees, who live in groups where females mate with many different males, have enormous testicles for their body size. They're built to produce vast quantities of sperm because in their world, a male's sperm is in direct competition with the sperm of every other male who mated with the same female. It's an arms race, fought inside the body, so evolution made the factory bigger. Now look at gorillas. In gorilla society, a single dominant male controls a group of females, and rival males rarely get a chance. There's almost no sperm competition. And so, despite being enormous animals, gorillas have surprisingly tiny testicles. They simply don't need more. So here's the question. Where do humans fall? If we were naturally deeply monogamous, faithful by design, we'd expect to look like the gorilla, built for a world with no competition. If we were naturally promiscuous, we'd expect to look like the chimp. And the answer is, we land awkwardly, confusingly, right in the middle. Closer to the modest end, but not all the way there. Your own anatomy, carried in every human male body, is whispering a message about how your ancestors actually lived and loved. And it is not the clean, simple story most of us were raised on. And the testicles are just the first clue your body is hiding. There are others, and each one deepens the mystery. Consider this. In chimpanzees and many other primates, when a female is fertile, everybody knows. Her body advertises it with dramatic visible swelling, an unmistakable signal that she's ready to conceive. But human females are almost unique among primates, in that they do the opposite. Human ovulation is hidden, concealed. A woman near the peak of her fertility shows no obvious outward sign of it, and remarkably, often doesn't consciously know the precise moment herself. Scientists call this concealed ovulation, and it is genuinely strange. Why would evolution hide the single most reproductively important moment in the cycle? And here's the unsettling part. Nobody is completely sure why. There are several competing theories, and they point in almost opposite directions. One major idea is that hidden ovulation evolved to strengthen pair bonds. If a man can't tell when his partner is fertile, the logic goes, he has to stick around and stay attentive all the time, encouraging him to remain, to bond, to invest in her, and her children year-round rather than wandering off. That's the monogamy-promoting interpretation. But there's another theory that points the exact opposite way. Some researchers argue that concealed ovulation evolved precisely to confuse paternity. If no male can be certain when a woman conceived, or by whom, then multiple men might each treat her child as possibly their own, and crucially, would be less likely to harm it. In a dangerous world, a child whose paternity was uncertain might actually be safer, protected by several men instead of threatened by them. That interpretation suggests a far more fluid mating past than the tidy monogamous story. The honest truth is that we don't fully know which is right, and it may be some messy combination of both. But notice what even the debate tells us. The leading scientific explanations for our own anatomy are split between monogamy and something much looser. Our bodies themselves are ambiguous. They refuse to give us the clean answer we want. This is the story of where marriage, faithfulness, and jealousy actually came from. And the honest answer is far messier, far stranger, and far more revealing than you've been told. So let's start with the word at the center of all this, cheating. Because here's the thing, nobody tells you. The word cheating assumes something very specific. It assumes there are rules. It assumes that two people belong to each other in some exclusive way, that loyalty is owed, that there's a line, and that crossing it is a betrayal. Cheating only exists if ownership exists. You can only break the rules of marriage in a world that has already invented marriage. So before we can ask whether ancient humans cheated, we have to ask a much harder question. Did the rules even exist yet? And if they didn't, then the whole concept dissolves. You cannot be unfaithful to a promise that was never made in a world that had no word for the promise. Let's go back then to the deep past, to the world of hunter-gatherers, where our species spent the overwhelming majority of its existence. Now, I have to be careful here, and honest the way this channel always tries to be, because this is a topic where it's very easy to project our fantasies onto the past. Some people imagine ancient humans as perfectly faithful, noble couples. Others imagine a kind of free love paradise where everyone shared everyone. And the truth, as usual, refuses to be that simple. The honest answer is that human mating in the deep past was probably flexible, varied, and very different from the rigid model we treat as timeless today. What we can say, from studying both our biology and the hunter-gatherer societies that survived into modern times, is this. Bonds between partners existed. Humans clearly formed deep attachments. That capacity for love, for pairing up, for caring intensely about one specific person, appears to be genuinely ancient and built into us. But, and this is the crucial part, those bonds were often not permanent, not exclusive in the way we demand today, and not bound up with property, contracts, or lifelong vows. In many foraging societies, relationships formed and dissolved with relative ease. A couple might be together for a season, or for years, and then separate without scandal, and pair with someone else. Children were not the sole responsibility of two biological parents. They were raised by the whole band, by aunts and grandmothers, and the entire web of the group. Anthropologists have a name for this. They call it cooperative breeding. The child belonged, in a sense, to everyone. And in that kind of world, think about what happens to the very idea of cheating. If bonds are fluid, if children are raised collectively, if no one owns anyone, if there's no property to pass down, and no contract to break, then the entire architecture that makes cheating meaningful simply isn't there. There's nothing to betray, because nothing has been promised in those terms. The word loses its meaning. It's like asking whether a person trespassed before anyone had invented the idea of private land. So if marriage, in our strict sense, wasn't there at the beginning, where did it come from? When did the rules get built? And here's where the story takes its turn, because the answer, once again, leads us straight back to the same dark doorway we keep returning to: farming. For most of human history, as we've seen, there was very little to own and nothing to inherit. But when humans settled down and began to farm, everything changed. Suddenly, there was surplus, there was property, there was land and herds and grain stores and tools. And for the first time, humans had something that could be passed down, wealth that could be inherited by the next generation. And the moment inheritance enters the picture, a strange new anxiety is born, an anxiety that had barely existed before: paternity. Think about it from the cold, hard logic of property. If you are a man with land and wealth, and you want to pass it on to your own children, your own bloodline, then you suddenly, desperately need to know which children are actually yours. In the old world, where children belonged to the group, this question barely mattered. But in the new world of heritable property, it becomes everything. A man's entire legacy now depends on certainty about who fathered the children his wealth will flow to. And here is the uncomfortable truth at the very root of marriage. The institution of marriage, in its earliest formal sense, was not primarily about love. It was, to a significant degree, about controlling reproduction to secure the orderly inheritance of property. It was a contract, a way of binding a woman's reproduction to a specific man so that he could be confident his wealth was passing to his own genetic children and not someone else's. This isn't a fringe or cynical interpretation. It's an old and serious one. More than a century ago, the writer Friedrich Engels argued exactly this, that monogamous marriage arose not from romantic love, but from the rise of private property and the male desire to pass that property to legitimate heirs. And modern anthropology has found a great deal to support the core of this idea. Strict monogamous marriage tends to appear and intensify precisely in societies built on intensive agriculture, where land is limited, and dividing it up endlessly would destroy its value. Where there's heritable property, you tend to find rules demanding female sexual fidelity, ideologies of virginity, and harsh punishments for what we would call cheating. And if you still think strict one-man, one-woman monogamy is simply the natural, universal human default, the anthropological record will quickly disabuse you of that. When researchers surveyed the marriage systems of hundreds of human societies around the world, they found something striking. The majority of documented cultures have permitted some form of polygamy, usually polygyny, where one man may have multiple wives. A smaller number practiced polyandry, where one woman has multiple husbands, often brothers, a system found in parts of the Himalayas, where it helped keep scarce farmland from being divided. Some societies had institutions like so-called walking marriages, where partners maintained separate households and the relationship carried no expectation of permanence or shared property at all. The point isn't that any one of these is the true natural state. The point is the opposite. There is no single natural human marriage. What we have is staggering variety, shaped in each place by local conditions, by economics, by how land and wealth move from one generation to the next. The version most of us were raised to think of as timeless and universal, lifelong monogamy between one man and one woman, is just one option among many that humans have tried. And it became dominant in certain parts of the world, for very specific, very practical reasons tied to farming and the inheritance of land, not because it was written into our souls. And notice the asymmetry there, because it's important and it's ugly. These rules of fidelity have, throughout most of recorded history, fallen far more heavily on women than on men. The reason is that same cold logic of paternity. A woman always knows her child is hers. A man, before modern science, never could be fully certain. So the control, the suspicion, the punishment was aimed overwhelmingly at controlling female sexuality to guarantee a man's bloodline. Marriage, in this light, was not a symmetrical romance. It was, in many societies, a system for a man to own the reproductive future of a woman the same way he owned his fields and his herds. The same dark logic of ownership that gave us property and inequality reached, eventually, into the bedroom. Now here's the question that should be sitting in the back of your mind. If marriage and its rules were invented, built by farming and property, then what about jealousy? Is that invented too? Or is the green-eyed feeling that twists in your stomach something genuinely ancient, something written into us long before any of this? And here the answer gets genuinely fascinating, because it's both. Some form of jealousy does appear to be deeply rooted in human biology. We see emotional possessiveness, mate-guarding behavior in many animals, and it appears across virtually every human culture in some form. There seems to be an ancient emotional core here, an evolved response that flares up when a bond we value feels threatened. That feeling is probably very, very old. It likely predates marriage entirely. Even in those fluid ancient bonds, a person could surely feel the sting of being abandoned for someone else. Heartbreak is not a modern invention. But, and this is the key, the shape that jealousy takes, what triggers it, how intensely it burns, what we think it entitles us to do about it, all of that is powerfully molded by culture. The raw feeling may be ancient, but the idea that jealousy gives a person the right to control another, to demand total exclusivity, to treat a partner as property whose attention is owed, and whose straying is a punishable crime, that is something cultures built on top of the raw emotion, and built most intensely in exactly those property-obsessed agricultural societies. In other words, you may have inherited the spark of jealousy from a very deep past, but the bonfire we've built around it, the laws, the honor codes, the sense of total ownership over another human being's body and affections, that's a much more recent construction. The feeling is natural. The cage we build with it is cultural. Think about that for a second. We've taken an ancient flicker of emotional insecurity and over thousands of years wrapped it in property law, religion, and social code, until it became one of the most powerful forces governing human life. The feeling that someone could betray us became the feeling that someone could be stolen from us, like a possession. And the difference between those two ideas is the entire history we've just walked through. There's one more piece of evidence worth confronting directly, because it cuts right to the heart of the question. If sexual exclusivity were truly natural and effortless for humans, you'd expect that once marriage existed, people would simply follow the rules. But that is not what the data shows. Wherever scientists have been able to study it, in humans and in supposedly monogamous animals alike, they keep finding the same thing. The official pair bond and the actual reproductive reality don't always match. Biologists make a careful distinction here that's worth borrowing. There's social monogamy, two partners who live together and form a recognized bond, and there's sexual or genetic monogamy, complete reproductive exclusivity. And it turns out these are very different things. In the animal kingdom, many species we once held up as icons of faithfulness, certain birds especially, were revealed by DNA testing to be socially monogamous, but sexually anything but. The devoted pair raises the chicks together, while a meaningful fraction of those chicks were fathered by a neighbor. Humans are not birds, and reliable figures are genuinely hard to pin down and easy to exaggerate, but the broad lesson holds. The capacity to form a deep, lasting bond with one partner and the capacity to stray from it appear to coexist in our species, in tension, both of them real. We are not built as perfect, effortless monogamists, nor are we built as indifferent libertines. We are built, frustratingly, as both at once, which is exactly why faithfulness has had to be reinforced everywhere, with vows, laws, religion, and the threat of shame. You do not need to build powerful social machinery to force people to do what comes effortlessly. The very existence of all those rules is itself a quiet confession about human nature. So, let's come back to the question we started with. Did ancient humans cheat? And the honest answer is that for most of our history, the question barely makes sense. There were bonds, and there was love, and there was almost certainly heartbreak and longing and rivalry. But the specific concept of cheating, of violating an exclusive property-like contract, of sexual ownership, that concept needed marriage to exist first. And marriage, in that strict form, needed farming, surplus, and inheritance to bring it into being. Our ancestors didn't cheat, for the same reason they didn't trespass and didn't hoard. The rules that would make those things possible simply hadn't been invented yet. But now I want to turn this around because I don't want to leave you with something cold and cynical, as if love is nothing but a property scam in disguise. Because that isn't true either, and it would be a betrayal of the evidence to pretend it is. Here is the genuinely beautiful part. The capacity for love, for deep attachment, for wanting to wrap your whole life around one specific person, appears to be real and ancient and truly part of us. That's the gorilla and the chimp comparison again. Remember, we didn't land at the fully promiscuous end. We landed in the middle, leaning toward attachment. Our bodies, our long childhoods, our tendency to pair up and care for our young together, all of it suggests that bonding, real bonding, is woven into our nature. The love is not the invention. The love is the ancient, genuine thing. What was invented, what was built by property and farming and power, was the cage we put the love in, the contracts, the ownership, the rules about whose body belongs to whom, the harsh asymmetry that punished women and excused men. Those are the human-made structures, and we should be honest, that many of them were built to serve wealth and control, not love at all. And that, strangely, is a hopeful thought, because it means the parts of human bonding that are genuinely beautiful, the attachment, the devotion, the choosing of one another, were never the problem. They're the inheritance worth keeping. It's only the cage, the ownership, the control that we built relatively recently. And anything we built, we can choose to examine, to question, and to rebuild better. Today, for the first time in thousands of years, most people in much of the world marry for love rather than land. The institution that began as a contract for transferring property has been slowly, imperfectly, transforming into something our ancient ancestors might actually recognize. A bond between two people who simply choose each other. We are, in a strange way, trying to find our way back to something we lost, while keeping the dignity and choice we gained along the way. So here's my last question for you. When you feel that pull toward one person, that devotion, that ache, how much of it is the ancient, genuine thing? The deep human capacity for love that your ancestors felt around their fires 40,000 years ago? And how much of it is the cage, the inherited sense of ownership, the idea that another person can belong to you? They live so close together inside us that we can barely tell them apart. But learning to tell the difference might be one of the most important things any of us ever does. Let me know what you think in the comments. I genuinely want to hear it. Until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I'll see you soon.